if this is your first time, so this is one of many CTSI-sponsored workshop series. This series is on translational teamwork. This is presentation number 3, and we have one more the following week. So I presented 3 weeks ago on basics of teamwork. Then we had Dr. Loreen Tumil-Burhoster, who talked about team including community stakeholders. We have Dr. Szczesek talking today about her experience working with very large multi-institutional, multidisciplinary teams. And we have one more workshop next week that will deal specifically with clinical teamwork, so unique aspect about clinical teams. And go ahead, one more. So all of the workshops and the schedules are presented on our website, so you can always see ahead what's available and see what fits your schedule. We record these workshops, so if you miss one, and you would like still to get your certificate of completion for the whole series, you can go, they will be posted afterwards, and you can reach out to Catherine and get the link to the recording so you can watch what you missed. As I mentioned earlier, there are many other workshops that may be in a way complementary to what you're going to hear about today. We have responsible conduct of research, we have scientific communication. Those are many skills that successful teams use that are not going to be covered here, but you can certainly sign up for those workshops when they offered. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the workshop series is not designed to give you a new skill set or new degree in 90 minutes, but it is designed to introduce you to perhaps an area of a skill set that you may not be aware of, that you always wanted to learn, and give you an idea of how you can approach those skill sets, such as leadership or teamwork or communication or boundary crossing, etc. Those are fundamental skill sets of clinical and translational researchers. So I mentioned the certificate of completion, so please apply if you complete them all. If you are clinicians, you could get CME credit as well. And the most important request that I'm going to make, and then I'll stop, is that please fill in the workshop evaluation forms that you're going to receive afterwards from Catherine, and she's going to also put them in the chat, because we do want to know your opinion. We do want to address your other learning priorities when we're planning for developing new educational content for the following years. And we are happy to incorporate your feedback, modify existing materials, workshops, presentation style. So we are really interested in whether we are addressing the needs of our audience. So thank you for your feedback in advance. And now the stage is open for Dr. Jill Szczesek, who is a vice president for resources and
associate vice president.
Okay.
No, I just don't want to take my boss's title.
It's such a big hat to wear, Jill, and you're doing so gracefully that I think you totally deserve it. And Jill is going to talk about from her many years of experience of what it takes to work with very large research teams. Thank you very much, Jill, and look forward to your talk today.
Thank you, Dr. Noyes. So I appreciate the time to be able to share about this topic, because I think many times across the course of our careers, and it's actually nice that we have a smaller group, because I think that we can have good conversation about many of these things if you are interested in building something big. To the point though, where it's disappointing though, because I think maybe when people saw the topic that this was going to be about big centers, I fear that maybe they were intimidated and don't recognize that it's really not as complex or daunting as they might think that it is. And I think that's what the intent of my message today is about that you should not be intimidated to go after something significant. You should be encouraged and motivated to pursue something large. And, because we have a really nice size group, I would just basically welcome any questions that you have as we go through this. I thought it would be good to just give you a little bit of background about why I chose this specific topic with the consult of Dr. Noyes. And I actually have to say before I dig into all of that, thank you to her especially. I think you probably all realize that she is a tremendous resource, not only for the CTSI, but for the university. And so there is something to be said for the many hats that she wears across the university and bringing things like this to fruition. So thank you, Katja, for giving us this opportunity to talk about big research centers. Also, just wanted to also say thank you to Catherine. Catherine has been wonderful in coaching me throughout this entire process, and she's a tremendous resource for the CTSI. So a little bit about my background. Thank you for the promotion, Dr. Noyes, but I'm Associate Vice President for Research Administration and Finance for the Vice President for Health Sciences. What's my background? I did a Bachelor's of Science at RIT in Rochester. Worked at RIT for a number of years afterward, having gone back after my first master's degree. And after that, I enjoyed very much the higher education experience. And just like any undergraduate student, there were highs and there were lows. And I had great advisors throughout the process that motivated me to get back into the environment, to be able to give back to students who are in the space. So after undergraduate work, I pursued a master's in higher education administration at Canisius here in town, now Canisius University. Hard for me to say sometimes because that's all fresh and new. Also a master's in sociology education here at UB. And then I was given pretty good latitude and some flexibility in the higher education program within UB to pursue what was interesting to me. And so the faculty and administration in the higher ed program allowed me to, while I was running Hopman Woodward, which is a medical research institute here in town, and BioExfel, which was the center that I'm basically going to talk with you about today, they gave me a chance to pursue my doctoral work in science policy and team science. And so I was fortunate that they gave me the flexibility because there's not a lot of programs out there that permit you to pursue something like this. I can tell you that before we go into all of this, probably by the end of it, you're going to recognize that at the end of the day, I was not I'm not coordinated enough to have been a cheerleader in high school by any stretch. But when you hear what I have to comment on today, I am definitely a cheerleader for supporting investigators in their research endeavors. Research administration has become a passion for me, and I believe firmly in the contributions that research administrators make to supporting investigators and to getting where they need to be. And so, and that's a little bit about what I want to talk with you about today. I'll caution you because I spent a ton of years, like many of you, in literature and reading and digging into all of the things that I find interesting about the research environment. The start of my presentation, I just want to give you a little bit of context about where big teams came from. And I apologize if you know all of this or if you've heard it before, bear with me, but it's something I find interesting. And I read about for a long, long time, and then actually talk about how big teams came to be from a policy perspective. So the first thing that we can probably just walk through, and this is something that I actually had in my dissertation, is just how did this all come to fruition? How did we eventually get to the point where we recognize that big teams are significantly impactful in not only their research contributions, but they are worth the investment that we make into them. And so that's a blend of a bunch of different disciplines and a bunch of literature and investigations that are out there. And so you're looking at everything from a national level on science policy, and I'll dig into the history of that. But, what are the directions that are being set, and how are they making decisions about where investments are being made? What came out of that probably about 20 years ago is the fact that they recognized that over the course of the last 100 years, and about 20 years ago, they started to implement policy in regards to it, is that team science, even though there are challenges with building large groups of scientific research teams, there are challenges with getting them organized. Sometimes they're slower to start. You'll see that in the literature over and over, that it takes them a longer time to get going. They just don't put out the publication in a year or 18 months. But when they do get some momentum, they can be extremely impactful and productive. And so team science was probably recognized probably about 20 years ago, in that the investments that were made into the slower startup of it and the significant resources had a cost benefit. And then lastly, I'll just mention that the environment is like, how do we look at it on a college campus or a university campus? And you've heard, you're all at the university, we want to be top 25, and we want to go after major research awards and significant investments from federal agencies specifically, not to discount the foundation resources that are out there, because sometimes that's a tremendous opportunity as well, because some of them are doing very impactful work across the research environment. But how do we on a campus not only facilitate for investigators going after these major center opportunities, and how do we support them and actually motivate them too? Because if you look into the literature, you'll see that when you're going after these major center opportunities, it can result in lots of productivity, lots of publications, but at the same time, how are we adapting to investigators, because they're the 30th author on a paper of 150 authors. And so how are we adapting our campus systems to recognize and motivate people to do this, rather than detracting from it when they're going through the tenure track process? So that's the space that we're in right now. But let me tell you a little bit about some history on how these big teams came to be. So there's a lovely book. Yeah, actually, I've got it here. I wanted to show it to you. The Science of Science Policy. There was a gentleman who years ago, he was the science policy advisor to the first George Bush when he was in the White House. He was also the director of the Brookhaven National Lab down on Long Island. And at the time of his passing, sadly, or just shortly before, he was the president of Stony Brook. And I know a lot of us here on campus talk about Stony Brook all the time, but he was pretty remarkable. And one of the things that he recognized, it was John Marburger, he recognized that historically, we were making decisions about where investments should be made into scientific research based on two different factors. We were looking at the expert in the room, which was the principal investigator who had the expertise in a very specific space, or we were listening to, at a national level, we were listening to lobbying groups, people who had the resources to support making arguments to the people who were decision makers. And so in 2005, he addressed the American Association for a AAAS, basically. And he stood up and he said, we're making good decisions, but at the same time, we're not making decisions with a lot of data. It was a lot of information about, instinct and expert opinion and that sort of thing. And so he basically called for a new field to be developed, which is the science of science policy. And to this day, there is a lot of literature, and there are a lot of people engaged in this particular on this particular topic. and it continues to stimulate interest in research and data. And actually, it has evolved over a period of time so that we're making good decisions. And actually, he encouraged social scientists to help and engage in the conversations because he recognized that you couldn't just do this independently based on data coming out of the hard sciences. At that point, when he proposed all of this years ago, the research budget that he was looking at from the executive office was $139 billion. We're at $191 billion now. And so when you think about needing data to make those investments and to move into space and invest money wisely, it just seemed like not only a reasonable thing to request, but actually the smart thing to do. I'll mention as well that, Dr. Marburger, it wasn't the first time that this came up. Science policy came about really out of the Great Depression. So years ago, when they were lacking resources coming out of the Great Depression, there were organizations like the American Institute of Physics that wanted to figure out how scientific discoveries could shape the lives of people when they were trying to come out of very, very difficult times. So he wasn't the first to suggest it, but he was actually the first person to probably bring it into a position where you wanted to look at it in a very qualitative and quantitative way. Any questions so far? Okay. So the science of team science, it followed after, at least everything that I've ever read, it's followed after what John Marburger originally proposed with the science of science policy. So the science of team science basically came about and started looking again to the social sciences and saying, how do we really build interdisciplinary efforts? How do we support investigators in the best way that we possibly can? And how do we do this in an orchestrated, in a supported way, rather than just having it sort of happen spontaneously? And so you probably have all seen this a bunch of times. Dr. Noyes knows this stuff inside and out. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. And I think that you've probably all read a ton of articles and different aspects of how do you organize teams within research. The things that I think are great, I put up on the screen. NCI was one of the first groups to jump on board. There is an amazing researcher who is really a founder in the field. Her name is Kara Hall. She's still at NCI, and she's done some remarkable work in the field. And basically, it's a whole body of literature looking at how do you build teams in the space, and what are the costs and what are the benefits to it. So as I mentioned, there's always pros and cons. Big is hard to organize. And I'm going to talk with you about my experiences in a specific NSF center, and I'm going to call Dr. Bauer out in this conversation to discuss it. But big is complex, and centers are challenging at times to build and to resource, and probably the first and the foremost is to actually acquire. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the competitiveness of the award that we were able to secure. Yet at the same time, there is tons of data that shows that eventually when faculty do get engaged in centers, and big centers at that, and we're talking about, as I mentioned, people who are engaged in research efforts that have hundreds of investigators, their publication rates are stronger. The data just shows it. It takes them a little bit longer to get published because they have to work together, and you have a lot of people weighing in on different opportunities, but at the same time, their publication rates are great. Their career trajectories, when you start involving people in center opportunities, all of the data shows that, generally speaking, they probably acquire tenure earlier, even though our systems, generally speaking, aren't really designed for people who are doing center type work. But there is a recognition of the fact that what they're doing is impactful. And there's large scale impacts to all of it, which is why the government is investing. And as I'll give you an example, $50 million at the onset of an award, which is very different than a traditional RO1. So some of the literature right now just basically shows that our university systems, I think, were better than where we were when I originally defended my dissertation. I think we're moving in the right direction, but at the same time, I don't think that we're quite there yet, where we're recognizing that for early career folk, their participation in something big really is as significant as it is. So at this point, I'll bounce to Catherine. We wanted to poll you on a couple of things. Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, the poll is up. How big is the largest research team you have participated in?
It comes back to the fact that it's and I was speaking with Dr. Noyes earlier today. It's a very unique experience, and honestly, it happened probably too early in my career. It's something that you would think about, that you aim towards, that you aspire to do in participating in such a significant research endeavor. When I say not only size and scope, but impact. At the time, I'll be honest with you, I did not understand at that point in time how unique it was. I just thought $50 million awards were $50 million awards, and didn't quite recognize it. So that's something to reflect on, frankly. You're presented with a tremendous opportunity and you just roll with it. But at the same time, I probably didn't savor the moment quite the way that I probably should have. But it was just lack of experience, frankly. So it's something that's a little bit unique. So I want to talk a little bit about that particular experience. So this is year one of that group. And I guess at this point, I'm going to stop with the history lessons and I'm going to turn this into a little bit of a case study and just talking about lessons learned and what I think are really important aspects to think about if you're going to build something big. So this is year one of the Biomedical Science and Technology Center. It was in 2013. And we were funded by the National Science Foundation in a very competitive process of about 350 applicants for a 10-year period for $50 million. And the interesting part of that is that the 350 applicants it was actually even selective within itself, because each institution, NSF, is very, very selective about allowing only one particular application from an institution. So some institutions, and I'll tell you a little bit about the background on this, but Arizona State University may have had 3 that they could have put forth, and every institution has to select internally, and you guys are all familiar with that. But interestingly, the scientific lead for this, who I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes, he was at Arizona State University and he wanted to submit there, and they told him he missed his deadline. And guess what? The University at Buffalo with Hauptman Woodward at the end of the day wound up with a $50 million National Science Foundation $50 million award. And we were one of 3 that were awarded that year. So the cycle is probably about every 3 years. And that's something good to think about too. If we had lots of investigators on this, or if we were talking about it, one of the things that I just want to mention through the course of this is that planning is critical. When you're going after something like this, it's not you wait for the RFP to come out and that you actually go and pursue it. It's something that you do for years in advance. So BioExfel is sunsetting. Actually, it should have sunset in September, but it's actually has a no-cost extension right now. Is a $50 million center that's a collaboration of about 8 different institutions. And at the end of the day, I would say that the number of investigators, the students, the graduate students, the postdocs, and everything like that were probably 125 on one of our strongest years, 125 to 150 individuals. We were awarded, 3 were awarded in 2013, and we were in the mix of MIT and Harvard, were the other 2 institutions that were awarded. And I'll tell you, though, that honestly, because I have still to this day a very close relationship, not with the program officer, but the executive director who runs the Science and Technology Centers for NSF. We were probably the most productive, frankly, of the three, for lots of reasons, and we can talk about that a little bit. So just to give you a little bit of context and throw a little bit of science into this, which is not my strength, but I'm just gonna at least tell you what BioXFEL means. It's and Bill, you can correct me as we go through this if you need to. What is it? It's biology with X-ray free electron lasers. And what is that? It's basically taking a laser that's about 1/4 of a mile long in only a few places on the planet. And it emits such fast pulses. It's basically taking individual frames of molecules while they're in motion and capturing those images. And so the image that you see right here is what we're representing as a protein structure. And the laser is coming in to basically, at the end of the day, make a molecular movie so that you see these images. Normally what we can capture in past science, they're static, they're individual, they're snapshots. But when you take a bunch of snapshots that are so fast paced, it's like creating a movie stream. And so what does that do is that for pharmaceutical design and biology and everything like that, you start to see things, how they're working in our bodies, whether they fold and why they fold and what they look like and how they connect. And of course, you can see that here is the beamline in California. And this is what it looks like underground. And it's just, it's a phenomenal enterprise, frankly. But as you can understand, when you look at something like this, you've got biology in the mix, you have engineers in the mix, you have computational people in the mix. There's a tremendous researcher here at the University of Buffalo, Tom Grant, who knows how to analyze all of the data coming off of these instruments. And so when I say interdisciplinary, this is very, very interdisciplinary, and actually pretty fun and exciting. Bill, do you want to correct me on anything?
I don't think I need to. You got it all right.
Okay, do you want to add anything?
No, well, I guess one thing. So when you say interdisciplinary, we had applied physicists and mathematicians, we had engineers, we had structural biologists, we had molecular biologists, virologists. So it really was very diverse, and for us it would be like spanning multiple schools
and multiple institutions, and frankly at the end of the day, and I'll tell you a little bit more in the presentation, multiple countries as well. So here's my recipe. I sat down and I was like, what did it take in order to make this work? And I'm not just going through the different concepts that are within the proposal that we had to answer in order to secure the funds. What are the big elements that really made, what are the big elements that really made this happen? And the first one is obviously, and you probably all recognize it, is vision and leadership. And so I know that Dr. Noyes has done a presentation recently about leadership styles and leadership types and the different personalities probably that are out there. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Spence. Did he have a tremendous CV? Yes, without question, of course. Did he have the swoosh, as I would say, to back up putting in a submission like this? Yes, he did. Yet at the same time, I do think, other than the fact that he was brilliant, I think one of his greatest assets and one of his best character traits is that he had the ability to communicate with people. And he did it very well. And that's how that team was built. So when you talk about what happened with bringing together physicists and mathematicians and biologists and beamline engineers, he had a personality that was welcome. It was warm, and at the same time, he actually communicated well about what his vision was for the big project. What did that allow him to do? Recruit. He built a team. He was able to recruit all of the different elements of what he saw that were part of the pie that he had to complete. And he recognized that relationships matter. And I would say this to investigators over and over again, is that the way that you engage with people, and not only engage with the teams that are around you, but the way that you engage with the administrators around you, it matters. He motivated people to want to help him. He wanted people to feel very much part of a team. And I think that was part of the reason that this was so successful. Yet at the same time, administratively, he was a hot mess. And I would say that if he was on the call right now, because really this award, if he had all of his ducks in a row, and if he had communicated with his institution and they recognized that we were going after this a second time, this award really probably should have been at Arizona State University. But he missed a deadline and he couldn't make the argument with administrators. And it was a loss for them. But my second last slide in the presentation, I'll tell you why it wasn't so much of a loss, because they learned a lesson from it, frankly. So he started this work years in advance, prep. And so his vision and leadership is basically what got us here. He also thought outside of the box. Every proposal that you put in, you know that, and especially with centers, because what happens with some of the big proposals is that you're not only going to send the proposal out the door, like Dr. Murphy just submitted the P50 this past August that Dr. Noyes was part of, and it scored very well, and it's very, very exciting. But it was a proposal submitted, scored, and then they hear back. When you're talking about big centers, $50 million, hundreds of investigators, they're not only going to review the proposal, but they're going to actually come and do a site visit. And when they came out, they give you criticism, and they critique, and they ask you tough questions over the course of a couple of days. And so they thought about what are some of the challenges that we were facing. Access to the instrument that I just showed you a couple of slides ago, that's a 1/4 mile long. You can imagine the demand for it, because it doesn't only have applications for biological purposes, but it has multiples. So we had to have an answer for that. And what was his answer for that? He thought outside of the box, and we knew that something was coming online in Europe. And so he made that part of the effort. And so we had, and we still have to this day, very strong European collaborations. And at one point, NSF, and I shouldn't say this to you, they funded a person to work on that exfil through our grant. So they recognized that international collaborations were helpful. Catherine, did you want to say something, because your mute's off?
Thank you. We have a question from the text. Someone was wondering if he had problems delegating as well.
That's interesting. I don't know. I think he was a mentor to many, so I don't think so. I don't think he was a delegator. Had hesitancy in delegating because he very much wanted to bring along the next generation. I just think that he just administratively wasn't interested. And I think that you'll see that a lot in some of the big centers, and that I'll get to one of my slides coming up, is the fact that administrators that you engage really have to be a critical part of what you're building to back you up on it. Nobody can be perfect. Nobody's perfect. So thank you for that.
It was me, and I was wondering whether he was, not to use the word control freak, but sometimes people, it's their magnum opus, and even letting go for administrative type tasks is difficult. And realizing that you need to hire somebody who can run FEMA, somebody at that level to just run the grant, to take over the administrative for you.
Yeah. I don't think he was that type. No, Dr. Spence not. But is it out there? Yes, you know that. But he was not that. In fact, I said to Dr. Bauer a little bit earlier today when we were talking about getting ready for this, I wept a little bit as I was putting this together, because he's such a loss in so many ways in regards to the scientific community, and just basically recognizing and realizing what he's built. But so next thing, we have another poll for you, and it was good to see how many of you have been engaged in bigger type things. But when you start looking at a big center, I'm curious to know from all of you, with a large number of investigators, what do you think is more important, length and funding, amount of funding or flexibility. Because as you can imagine, I have a couple of opinions about it. So if you don't mind weighing in. Everything that you selected, I agree with completely. Flexibility is critical. When you're looking at something that has a significant number of people, you have to anticipate turnover. You have to anticipate the fact that there will be attrition. There will be people that you're probably going to want to say, you're probably not the best fit for this particular effort any longer. So you need flexibility in that regard. But you also, when you're looking at 10 years in advance, the biggest thing that you can do is anticipate what you can't anticipate. To plan for what is going to be coming out of the field, because something might be happening in a periphery discipline in engineering that significantly impacts what's happening on the beam line, and it's more effective or it's faster or anything like that. And I use that as an example, but you have to be able to prepare for those things. What I have said before is that you can't, it's hard to draw dollars back. Once you've committed a budget to individual institutions, it's hard to bring dollars back. So flexibility is really key, at least from my vantage. Does anybody want to say anything about that or past experiences that you've had?
I think, Jill, I mentioned one thing that regardless of how talented the PI is and how well you predict everything that you hope to happen, you can't predict everything that's going to happen. And I think for a lot of grant proposals, we end up rebudgeting almost from the day one, because those 9 months when grant is in the review, a lot of things can change. However, there are grant mechanisms that are not flexible. And that makes it extremely difficult to feed real life, especially in the kind of research we are looking at that involves humans and healthcare systems. And, you know, everybody had to deal with COVID, completely revised study protocols to be able to complete. So I do agree that even though intuitively you will think if you give you enough money, you can do anything. But if you don't have ability to rebudget, change your timeline, fire and hire different people, you probably will have a lot of challenges achieving your objectives.
Agreed. And I mean, I think the example that you just mentioned is the perfect one. Like COVID, whoever anticipated? And not only while you were midstream, but at the same time while you were still going out and applying for things. But yeah, it's the perfect example. Thank you, Dr. Noyes. So what's the next big part of the recipe, as I call it, or as I've basically been looking at it, is the members and the resources. So I think about it from two different perspectives, is that members are critical. What Dr. Spence did was tremendous to be able to build people who wanted to work, build a group of people who wanted to work together. That is a very unique talent and something that should be appreciated because he knew what he needed in order to accomplish what he did. But at the same time, there's also a recognition of the fact, and this comes back to all of the stuff that I read and that I wrote about in my doctoral work, is that when you start combining the resources, not only intellectual resources, but the physical resources of multiple institutions, you make a very credible argument. So you're going after support, and you're maximizing the resources and the investments in multiple groups. And that's something that you should be thinking about. And so one of the things that we did very early on was to take an inventory of that, is to understand who our groups were and then what they brought to the table. And that was very, very important in order to make this happen. I'll show you, and this is something that you all know. It's interesting and it's good, but it's disheartening at the same time. And I say this coming from being at a position where I'm constantly rooting for and trying to assist and prep and support investigators in Buffalo, is that do we have the resources of, I'll mention a couple of the collaborators that we had on the center, a Stanford, an Arizona State University, a Cornell. Do we have those resources? No, we don't. And so we're always up against something like this. And this is just an example of how when you do secure resources like $50 million to build a center, what do? They just, they poise you for greater things. And a great example of that, and actually it was disturbing to me a couple of months ago, is that Dr. Noyes, Dr. Murphy, they're all going after renewal right now for the CTSI. The amount of funding that they can go after at this point is scaled based on the total research expenditures of our institution. So we can't even actually ask for the total dollar amount that NIH is willing to invest in the CTSI that they would give to Georgetown, because Georgetown has greater research expenditures. So this is a good example of the fact that when you participate, you're more productive, it adds to CVs, it brings more resources, and it's just a cycle that continues to spin. Dr. Noyes, do you want to comment on that?
So I think that's a very good point that talks about trajectory. So very often when we talk about teams, we think it's a snap of the fingers kind of event. You make a team and you perform and you have grant funding. But what Jill is talking about is that you actually need to think about bigger goals as a, in this diagram, it's a circle, but it's more of a spiral. You build a manageable team, given how much resources you have. You go and you get the funding or show the results that you could afford, even though your goals may be on the $50 million grants, but you can't go for $1 million grant with 3 investigators. And sort of recognizing that more funding generates more data, generates greater funding. It's something that we need to think about when we talking also about developing research teams, because going too big too early is just as bad as not going big enough. Agreed.
Thank you for the comment. So to the point, and it comes back to what we were just talking about, you know, when it comes to resources, I think we all agreed, flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. And the one thing that I can say to you is that it is not uncommon with some agencies to basically ask for a pot of money or a pool of resources to basically say planning for the future. And you know, the terminology differs depending on which agency you're talking to, but can you say to them, I would like, and I can give you an amount, I think we probably put $750,000 a year into what we consider discretionary investigator funds. And what that was is we defined it as competitive funds that were meant to stimulate the next projects, the next generation, or seed funds for the next efforts years and years from now. And so it's not that you can't ask, it's just a matter of like when you're putting in some of these big things to communicate well enough with your PO or the administrative officers as to what they will give you the opportunity to include. But we did it, and it's not unheard of. And to that point, I just want to say one more time, keeping a good amount of resources centrally allocated, I think, is actually very valuable, because then you can disperse them out as it's needed to other partnering institutions, but at the same time, you need the ability to be able to do that. Pulling funds back is near impossible. So what % of total funding should go to science? Well, you guys are answering that. I'll just say, when you start looking at very large RFPs of a scale like this, as you're probably aware, there's so many different elements to it. Tell us what you're going to do for knowledge transfer. Tell us what you're going to do for education and diversity and inclusion activities. Tell us what you're going to do administratively. How are you going to connect these people? And when you start running very big centers, and I think Dana Bailey is an excellent example. She is a rock star in the CTSI because she basically, that's her focus. And when you start talking about organizing hundreds of people, millions of dollars, $5 million a year, dispersing into multiple institutions, you can't do that without investing significantly in administration. And sometimes will your administrative team bring that back and support you via the institution? Yes, but at the same time, I actually had to report out annually to NSF as to how much we were actually investing in administration, because they wanted to make sure that we weren't cutting costs in some of that, in those regards. Because at the end of the day, they want their data back too. They want to know that we're well organized, that you're well organized, and that they're going to get the data that they need in order to justify the investment that they've made. So with that, Catherine, bless her, she helped me figure out how to do a breakout session. And I thought we could talk a little bit and just, I don't know if we even really need to break out. Katya, what do you think?
We can break in 2 groups, I think.
You want to? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have Jill, you lead one, and Bill, can you lead the other one?
Yes, I can. That sounds
Right.
good.
Before we
The
go
point-
into groups, Jill, can you tell us the
The purpose.
the rules?
So ideally, as you can imagine, bringing scientists together to speak about what they want to accomplish, if they're adequately supported with resources, that's the easy part in some regards. Getting people to talk about what they envision and what they want to do. Scraping for every dollar is something very, very different. And so how do you equitably and also from a very strategic vantage distribute resources? And that's what this is about. This is an example of some of the things that we encountered within BioXFeld that I thought would be good examples to talk about. Before you go into it, I'll tell you something about an experience that I just had with Dr. Murphy. We put in the P50 this past August. He was very committed in a very good way to making sure that community partners were treated just as equally as university partners. And there is something to be said for that. But at the same time, as much as we want to do that, it's not always the case. So if you can just take a peek at some of this stuff, and then we can weigh in and figure out what everybody thinks about it.
What do people expect to do? Are we team 1 and team 2, or?
You're actually all going to do the exact same thing. So is that correct, Jill?
And then talk about what everybody thought about them. Yep.
Yep. And so you're going to want to pick a reporter and a recorder, so that you can just share ideas when you come back.
Oh, yeah. So I'll clarify really, Dr. Noyes. So it's, when you look at it, these are the different groups or the different efforts that would be itemized within the budget of a particular center, is what that means.
And I'm just going to open the rooms.
So it's a little bit not fair because with this exercise, I of course had I prepped it, so we were able to talk about that, and then Dr. Bauer knows it pretty well, and he probably doesn't know all of the nasty details of the story about how something like this happens, but I shared it with my group that you bring a bunch of investigators together over dinner in Puerto Rico and order multiple bottles of wine and negotiate out renewals with this kind of thing. Because that's exactly how this happened, at least for the renewal of the BioXL Center. But I mean, Bill, you want to talk a little bit about what your group was thinking and what you guys talked about, and then I can tell you.
Sure. Okay. So we broke it down by percentages of the budget. We didn't have time to calculate the actual funding amount, but we could get the idea of how much we'd allocate to each group. We started with admin on the top and worked our way up. I mean, on the bottom and worked our way up to the top here, and came up with these numbers here. I don't know how these compare to yours, Jill, but I can go through our thought process if you want, or how do you want to handle this?
No, go ahead. Go through it.
Okay. So we thought that 10% for administration might be sufficient. This would include potentially meetings, any support staff, or any hires we'd need for directors that would potentially running new programming within the center. For educational activity, and we put 5%. I know this would vary a lot depending on the type of grant and what's expected for any educational output and programming that might have to be developed for the award. So we just estimated at 5%. And then worked our way through the scientific partners. We started actually for the scientific part of this part here. So it put 50% in for the majority of the science, which we assumed would be part of team 2, correct? So this would be where I think the largest group that has the most investigators and potentially the most need for funding here. And then split up between the other groups, the remaining amount. So 5% here for the Nobel laureate in the group. So we're hoping this person already has a lot of money, right? And is well funded. So this is more of a retainer. And then, so for the Independent Research Institute, I know that they have a really high IDC here, but did not end up giving them additional funding to support the IDC. We're hoping maybe they'll allow them to give it back and keep some of it. We thought that the essential partner has lots of equipment access would be important. It's good to keep them happy, and there's likely fees associated with using their equipment. And if it is really essential, then of course we can't do any of it without them involved. So that was our thought process. Did the other group have similar ideas, or?
We had a smaller group. Some of our people, I think, were just listening more so than able to participate, but they heard about our experiences with the STC. And so I basically talked about that, and we talked about how you go about navigating these things, especially from an administration perspective, and presenting investigators with initial budgets in order to be able to go out and negotiate it. I think that there is an element of that has to be part of this. So I think this looks great. I think that the team 3 probably couldn't get by, because if they're doing almost dollar for dollar with every fund that they get, that's a tough scenario. And so that's an argument to make about how you feel about independent research institutions still being viable or a critical part of the research infrastructure. And I think that the educational investment is probably too low. And we can talk about that, and it depends on where you wind up allocating resources, but you need talent in order to run that. And I've got a couple of slides, and I think I'm not even sure what time it is. I'll run through them super fast, but more than anything, I want you to talk about what you built, because you need really good talent in order to pull this off. And I think when you start talking about major centers, awards with great longevity and significant resources, all you have to think about is next generation. And so 5% is a little bit light. At least NSF would have told us that. So thank you, guys. John, did you want to comment on anything that we discussed, or?
Well, I think that we talked about ballpark budget for and the rationale for it as a framework that informs all of the detailing and the flushing out the detail. It so we didn't itemize it, but we talked about it conceptually.
Thank you for that. And thanks for everything that you shared in our session. Okay, so I'm going to fly through this really quick because I want you to actually hear from Dr. Brower a little bit, frankly. Next slide. Planning and proposing. What's the big element? What can I say about planning? Administration. Pick somebody who will support you very wisely, somebody who wants to be in it hand in hand and support you in the process. There is nothing worse than an investigator who has to do this single-handedly. There are a lot of people out there that would be stimulated by the environment, that can be helpful, that can help you with everything from the financial aspects to putting on your next conference. Engage them. And so I would just basically say that that's a critical element. external advisors, be careful about who you pick, because at the same time, and we ran into this issue, we were in a very, very selective field. And when you start engaging all of these investigators, who does it leave to evaluate you, frankly? Because we had such a big team going, but pick people that can help you, and not only help you, but actually advocate for you in many different ways. So that's a very essential element to all of this, because even once you get the $50 million, the pursuit of funding does not stop. It continues, and actually you should be thinking about the next steps. So I would just say, make sure that you have a really strong administrator, and pick your advisors cautiously. I would also say, and last thing is that, plan on everything that needs to happen: site visits, evaluations, people leaving, people coming, and people going, and just all of those different things to think about from an administrative perspective. Execution and evolution, and this is where I'm going to move really quickly. Communication about what happens, knowledge transfer, and I'll skip through a couple of slides really quickly, but how do you build teams when you're at 8 different places on different spots across the planet and trying to engage people in different disciplines? Communication, communication, communication. Celebrate your successes. Figure out how to get them to communicate regularly. The one thing I will say over and over again, and Dr. Noyes and I actually chatted about it this morning, is that the in-person stuff is never, there is so much value in that. And so what did we do? We had people together once a year for a site visit, and we built an extra day into it to prep for it, cover the site visit, and team build. And then we also held an international conference to bring people together to talk. And we spent a good amount of money on it, probably about $200,000 a year, to bring everybody together so that they didn't have to cover it out of their budgets. It was worth every dollar. So all of that time to bring people together was so worth it. And then just communications, the only thing I would mention here, know your audience. Don't just think about communicating amongst your members and out to the academic community. Your probably biggest target, and the people that you should communicate most with about your achievements and the things that you're doing, your program officers and the people in leadership positions at the agency that's funding you, because they want that information and they want to share it about what they've invested in that's been successful. And at this point, education and diversity and equity inclusion should be fully invested in, and you should have a very talented person. And let me hand it over to Dr. Bauer to talk about his experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Right, so I was the Education and Diversity Director. At the end of the award, I started off with a different title. I think I was Associate Director when I first started. But I was charged with creating unique programming that fit the needs of our scholars within the center. So at any given time, we would have probably about 75 postdocs and grad students involved doing the majority of the research. But they had unique needs that need to be met, and it was my job to figure out what those were and then create customized programming to meet it. So it was challenging, but I think one of the more rewarding things I was able to do. We partnered with the University of Puerto Rico. I think initially, before I even started, it was to fulfill some DEI requirements, but in the end, they really ended up being great partners. They were very motivated to learn and to be a part of it, and very smart and helpful, and really engaged in the research. The end result of this is that we have an actual pipeline that was built. I shouldn't say actual, I guess figurative pipeline, from Puerto Rico students to engage the scientists, and this is still ongoing. So we now have students that I was initially working with that are working in national labs, running beamlines. They're at Harvard and Stanford, and really doing great things. So I think that's really was my favorite part of all of it. We had an education and diversity committee that did a lot of the decision making. So that was helpful, just to have a team to run things by, to make sure that all was on board. We had stakeholders from all parts of the center in this. We had graduate students and postdocs represented there, and faculty from each one of the sites, so that we can make sure that we are meeting the needs of all the different parties. And I think we had on one of your other slides, Jill, that the assessment part was really important. And this is particularly true for the education and DEI aspects. Our assessment person was Sarah Woodruff from the University of Miami, Ohio, and she was really fantastic. I think it's important to find the best assessment team or person that you can. There could be someone at UB, but I think it may be better to go outside of UB to find someone who's less biased and less just going through the motions to make sure that you keep the money, but really giving you honest opinions about what can be improved or what can be changed. And she definitely did that. So that would be my recommendation for putting this together. I did end up publishing a paper on the education programming that was developed in BioExfil. So if you want to find it, it's out there somewhere. Or I can just let me know. I can send you a copy of it.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have any questions on any of that?
How do you think it impacted you in being able to lead a group of people and support their educational growth because you had a background in the field as compared to some of the other STCs who had people who were more grounded in like education?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, a lot of them did have more of an educational background. I think the one way that helped me was that I was able to more effectively train them. So I could lead workshops on my own. I could develop programming and specific educational lessons and particularly for the internship program. So where I had to train people who had never heard of structural biology before, it was really helpful to have the knowledge and background of that to teach them about the basics of it. I think a lot of the other teams would rely on faculty to do it, but then you have someone else different coming in through every time rather than having the same person who knows the people delivering the lectures. So.
Bill, Dr. Bauer is very well respected amongst the group of early career people that he mentored. And there were a lot of them, and they appreciate him very much. And I've never seen somebody with a greater commitment to fostering the next generation, frankly. It was tremendous. And I do think, I think there's pros and cons to engaging somebody to perform your educational activities who has a traditional educational background. But at the same time, what he brought to the table, his unique experiences, being able to speak with them as to the science of things, and he had a commitment to it. It was a very unique experience and a tremendous asset. So it's just, ups and downs, but thank you, Bill, very much for this and for that.
Yeah, of course.
I'll go through this really quick. Knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer is a big aspect of center reporting, and not only what are you going to do for us, but what did you do? And so there's a lot of different ways to come at it creatively as far as tracking your metrics that not only help you in reporting back, but actually communicating out to the general public. So publications, of course, that's the first and the foremost. I'll tell you right now, this is a screenshot. I looked at it earlier today. I did it a few days ago, but it's the same numbers right now. But we worked with a team on campus under Venu in the Cubs office that basically, as long as an investigator, and I put that in, as long as an investigator puts into their publication the award number for how they were funded for the work that they did, it's going to push that number up. So we started to work with them, and they developed an algorithm to start to track for us how many publications and how many protein structure database deposits were done. All great stuff to share back. So think outside of the box. The other thing that we did for knowledge transfers, we started to engage museums in the cities that we're participating in. If you go to the Buffalo Science Museum, and if you have small folk who are going through the exploratory area, you will see a BioExpel exhibit. And we did it, and there was a talk that went with it, and we did it at ASU. They don't have an exhibit, but we tried to find ways to engage. Explaining X-ray free electron lasers to 8-year-olds is not the easiest thing, but there are different ways to think outside of the box to do this sort of thing. I should mention, and one of the people that was very helpful in engaging with the knowledge transfer stuff, I just learned today, actually, that he passed away a couple months ago, was Dr. Ken Tramposh, and he was a lovely person, and he helped us significantly to get BioExpel up and running. You know, the searchable databases on the website, of course, it's helpful. There's no question about it. Again, always comes back to capturing outcomes, being able to report back, and then getting investigators to do the right thing to do it. So, oops. Challenges and lessons learned. I'm watching my clock. Does anybody have any questions before I launch into this? Because this is where I'm going to like wrap things up and tell you about the highs and the lows. Okay. It's always hard when you have a huge group of people. And especially for me, I have to tell you that I'm always like, when it comes to the research stuff, I get so excited. I just want to be I'm not going to say I want to be a people pleaser. I want to be a PI pleaser. I want people to be happy in the space that they're in, and I want to help them achieve what they want to do. And that's what I think research administration is about. So balancing the needs of very different personalities, it's hard. There's no question about it. Do you have difficult people in the mix? Yes. Do you have divas in the mix? Do you have prima donnas, people who are going to moan and groan and everything like that? But I think when you look at centers and the longevity of a 10-year award, you know, there's something beautiful about that. And you've basically built a family, in my estimation, over that period of time. And so those are all things to embrace and to just appreciate about the process, is that you have a lot of very unique perspectives. Always, 10 years is amazing. Investigators should get that on so many levels, because I think in order, if you have a tremendous idea and you're actually going to be impactful, is 3 years sufficient? No, generally speaking, not. You really want to be able to follow through something that you've envisioned and really see it come to fruition. 10 years is a beautiful thing, but don't let that stop you. You always need to be thinking way beyond that and thinking about the next steps. So don't think about, oh, we've got 10 years worth of funding. You need to be thinking about the next steps in succession. Don't be afraid. The agencies, when I say that NSF funded us for $50 million, it was probably $50 million plus, because Dr. Bauer, as an example, was doing great work. And when we needed extra support, like when we brought all of the Puerto Rico students to Buffalo because of, what was it, hurricane, which one was it, Bill?
That's Maria.
Maria, okay. We brought them to Buffalo. Guess what? We reached out. We're doing great work. We didn't want it to interrupt their studies. We got extra money. So don't think that just because you have a lot of money and you've been funded with a lot, that you can't ask for more, because they want to see you be successful. So just think about that and then lower the bar. As an example, plan for the future, and plan for the sunset and what's next. So here's the example. Arizona State University invested in the work. Bill, I see your smile. They invested in the work that we were doing. They invested in the science that we were doing, and they invested in the team. And as a result, about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, wound up with $90 million, not $50 million, because they doubled down on what we were already achieving. So when I say think about the future, I mean it. Think about the future. Don't think that it's the be all, the end all, in the end. And so lastly, I'll say, and I'll go back to Kara Hall. It's all about collaborations, I think. You know, Dr. Noyes probably talks about it time and time again within all of these workshops that she's been putting on and she's dedicated to, and all the efforts that she's not only committed to for the CTSI, but the Community Health Equity Research Institute and the School of Public Health and now the VPR's office. We can talk about it a lot, but collaborations are critical. And we've seen through science policy that they're investing in teams because they know that it's productive. And so the last thing I'll leave you with is that I'm sad that we didn't have more people to join, because I don't know if people saw big and thought, oh gosh, that's really intimidating. But the reality is that when you go big, you get more resources and you're just building something different. And it's a good opportunity to do something truly impactful that we've already recognized is impactful, based on interdisciplinary work and investing significant resources. So I guess that's my last thought with 2 minutes to spare.
So this has been a great discussion. Lots of interesting and very, very unique insights. Thank you very much, Jill, because unfortunately we don't publish enough about this. It's not your typical research study, right? How to do teams. And sort of as a result, this knowledge doesn't get shared enough among investigators and among administrators. I imagine you guys don't get together over coffee talking about how to manage complicating personalities of Nobel laureates. So thank you very much for sharing this with us today, and thank you for everybody who attended.